Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So welcome to today's vlog where you can hear next door's child, hang on. Welcome to today's vlog where I will be reading the International Booker Prize shortlist. I read a lot of book prize shortlists last year, but I didn't read the International Booker. I have never done the International Booker shortlist, but I thought this year might be fun. I I do enjoy reading a fair amount of translated fiction, and the International Booker has a prize award for the best book that has been translated into English. It is also an award that equally rewards the writer and the translator. It is the first bank holiday weekend in May. This year in the UK, because of monarchy, we have 3 bank holiday weekends. I really wish, why didn't you get crowned in like October when we don't have any bank holidays, rather than we've just had to for Easter. Regardless of the pointlessness of the Windsors, that means that it is this weekend I'm going to be mostly reading, I think, because my fatigue levels are not great right now. I may seem fairly animated, but that's kind of, sometimes when I have fatigue, I don't know if this happens for anyone else who experiences fatigue, you can do like 10 minutes of intense animation and then for the rest of the time you need to lie down. I mean, I am struggling to find the correct words, obviously my brain is not functioning. It's kind of like when you've had very little sleep. I have started reading The Gospel According to the New World by Maryse Conde, because the ebook is on script, so I've been reading it there. I have read Segu by Maryse Conde before, which was much longer, and I did enjoy it, but I didn't love the writing, and I'm finding it similarly now. I don't love the writing. You know, obviously because it's a work in translation, who can say if that's because of Maryse Conde or because of the translator, whose name I should know. There are moments of quite interesting turns of phrase, but there's also so many moments of incredible awkwardness, and I struggle with awkward writing. I find it very unappealing, and I don't like to read it. Let's see, I did make a note so that I could actually tell you what I mean. With whom little did he know what the future held in store for them, which is a very awkward sentence. Shortly before 10, the lights went out, and this was followed by a strident alarm bell. Not nice writing, like, it's like an instruction manual. Gospel According to the New World is the story of a boy called Pascal who was abandoned by his mother in a barn and was adopted by an elder couple. And he discovers things about his father and his past, and he's kind of taken to be perhaps a messiah or perhaps a troublemaker in this small island nation, which is never named, but Maryse Conde is from Guadeloupe and they do speak French, so nothing about the story is particularly gripping me right now. It's a very easy read and not particularly long, but I'm also not finding it particularly interesting in the way that it's dealing with like a combination of the gospel and the life of Jesus and combining that with ideas about colonialism. Just think it's not doing anything particularly interesting. But I do have some of the other books as well, so I'm going to get to them. I was going to read Time Shelter next because I got it from the library, so it's the first one that I had. But Kieran over at KD Books, whose information will be in the description, sent me his copy of Standing Heavy by GauZ. And considering the relative lengths, I feel like I might be leaning towards Standing Heavy, because this weekend I'm also finishing up War and Peace, the live show of which will be linked in the cards, which does mean that his underlining is included. So I will have some element of, it's almost like a buddy read because I will see what he was thinking. Actually, whole notes left in the book. On top of that, other books came in the post, so pretty sure this should be all the other 3, but I thought Whale was supposed to be large. Oh, the other 2 are very small. Yeah, so I've got Stillborn, Lovely Fitzcarraldo. I think this is my first ever Fitzcarraldo that I've bought. I feel like I'm behind on the Litfic booktube sphere as not owning a load of Fitzcarraldos, but I borrow things from the library most of the time anyway. So anyway, this is my first. I've had some arcs. In fact, you're sitting on the Macadama arc that Kieran also sent me, but this is my first. Anyway, this one's by Guadeloupe Nettle, which is interesting because one's set in Guadeloupe. I didn't say Standing Heavy is GauZ, who is from the Côte d'Ivoire, and again, French. There's a couple of French books. Time Shelter is by Gregory Gospodinov and was translated by Angela Rodel and is translated from Bulgarian. I don't think I've ever read any Bulgarian fiction. I haven't had much experience with Eastern Europe or Southeastern Europe, the Balkans, any of that. So yes, I will be interested to read. Then the one that I was like, is it Spanish for the other one? This one's the one that's in Catalan, so not actually Spanish. This is Boulder by Eva Baltazar. This is one of a trilogy, but it's one of those trilogies that's not that's like thematically linked rather than linked by plot, so you can read them in any sort of order. Another nice short one, love it. The chunky one, it's not too chunky, there's definitely chunkier books in the world. Whale by Kwan, which was translated from the Korean by Cheon. And so yes, I'm excited to read this one. This one sounds like the most up my street out of any of the books. This one and Time Shelter, I feel like these ones are the ones that are vying to probably be my favourites. Happen to be the two long ones, rather than all the short ones. Although one of the things that made me choose to do it this year and not do it last year was that last year there were some really chunky books. Since this is the year of big books for me in terms of big book club, it's nice to have an opportunity to not have to read big books because I'm already trying to fit so many in. But yeah, anyway, we're going to go ahead. We're going to read all of these 6 books. Get back to you, hopefully before the prize shortlist is announced, the prize winner is announced, but judging by my track record, that seems to be unlikely. Hello, I feel like I've been reading like mad and not talking to you about the books that I'm reading, which kind of defeats the point of a reading vlog. I finished The Gospel According to the New World by Maryse Conde, and I really didn't like it. Like, it didn't do anything like offensive, but I just didn't think it was particularly good. As I spoke about earlier on in the vlog, the writing felt very clunky and uncomfortable for me. There were moments of lovely writing, but for a lot of it, it was just really clunky and hard to read and awkward. Maryse Conde wrote this as an expression of her faith. It's supposed to be her last book, and it is about her Christian faith. And so it is about the boy Pascal, who is kind of born in a barn, a la Jesus, and there are a lot of miracles that happen throughout his life, but we are never really shown if they are true miracles or if they are like people hyping up his things that happen as if they were caused by him. And he certainly doesn't have faith in himself, and he spends the whole book looking for his father and trying to understand his purpose and find that faith. So I think he's kind of a Jesus figure and also kind of representing humanity searching for faith, although of course in the Bible Jesus' miracles are described as being miracles. Our belief in the Bible has to come from our own faith. It cannot come from proof. And so I think that a lot of the book is about having to come from faith, come from a place of faith. So even if it is not shown, Maryse Conde is not showing us proof because we cannot have proof, we can only have faith. But it's just seems a little confused, like, is the Pascal character Jesus or not? Because a lot of his life follows the beats of Jesus, and there's very awkward, very pointed moments that are very obviously from Jesus, like moments of like Judas kisses his cheeks, like the kiss of Judas, and it's you're putting a button on everything in a very awkward way. And at the same time, Jesus does exist in this world. The gospel exists in this world. There are mentions of Jesus and mentions of people celebrating Easter. So the concept of Christianity exists in this book, and yet no one's like, Pascal, your life is very much following the New Testament. How weird is that? So it just feels like it's not sure. It hasn't really made a decision which side of that line it falls on. Is this a new gospel, or is this a world in which that old gospel already exists? I also finished Standing Heavy by GauZ, and I don't think I talked to you about this at all, but it is a very short little book, only 150 so pages. And this one was interesting. So it tells the story of 3 Ivorian men in Paris across different time periods who are working as security guards. And the first man, Ferdinand, comes in the 1970s during the oil crisis, in which the French turned against immigrants. And then the other two, Osiri and Kasum, are working there in the late 90s, early 2000s, when 9/11 happens. And so we see the effects of how outside effects have such direct impact on their lives as immigrants, and how their status can change over the course, becoming undocumented by not doing anything, and the sort of arbitrariness of immigration law and immigration control, and how it's based a lot more on skin colour, because he does talk about like Polish immigrants versus black African immigrants and how that has an effect. But that story is split up between another security guard who is in, I would say, in a more modern time, because he mentions Amy Winehouse dying, so he's like after 9/11, what he is viewing whilst he is being a security guard. It's called Standing Heavy because being a security guard is a job that involves standing heavy, which just means standing there, not doing anything, and it talks about his observations of the world. And there are kind of satirical looks at consumerism and capitalism and the way that the system consumes both objects and people, the consumption of black bodies as security and their position as being both feared and utilised. But I feel like it just never quite found itself, very much in the nuances rather than very directly said. It was in between the lines, the way that different observations are stacked up against one another, introducing ideas of oil and the dependence on oil, but also the distancing for Arabic people, because there's lots of very wealthy Arabic people who shop in the shop. I felt like they were just sort of a constellation of ideas that weren't really very well brought together. So whilst I did enjoy a lot of the reading of it, I thought that the writing was interesting, there was a rhythm to it which I really enjoyed. For the most part it feels kind of vague and forgettable. So those are the two that I have finished, and then I am partway through two others. I'm about 100 pages in to Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov, and this is about a man who is a writer, and he is telling the story of another man, Gustin, who is a psychiatrist, I think, who is setting up these places, these time shelters, which are rooms and eventually like neighbourhoods that are set up to be like a certain specific time period. A lot of the times it's the 60s that we're talking about here, but we also talk about the 40s and the 80s. Georgi Gospodinov is a Bulgarian writer, and there is definitely kind of a rumination on the war and its effects on people. As you would expect from this, it's about like memory, historical reminiscences. There's this idea that the whole world is going to get Alzheimer's and everyone's going to forget everything and regress to the time period that they do remember. And it's really, really wonderfully written. I mean, I'm excited to see how this goes. I'm really enjoying the reading of it. It is very compulsively readable, but at the same time lovely. Like, I'm really enjoying the structure on a sentence level, and I'm enjoying the exploration of ideas. It's definitely not a character focused book. The characters are almost like gaseous rather than solid. I don't know how to describe it apart from that vague metaphor, but it's definitely much more focused on the idea of humanity and ideas. And there was a whole bit about people being followed in Bulgaria in the 60s under communism, and there's a definite like focus on the east-west divide and the middle of the 20th century in European history, particularly being on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain. But there's still 200 pages to go, so I'm interested to see where it goes. So I've read a further 100 pages of Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov, and I would say that I really like the writing of this book. It has a kind of melancholy, slightly strange air, because it is a strange concept that people are starting to return literally to old times, but it has a very clear political outlook. He is focusing mostly on Bulgaria. He is a Bulgarian writer, of course, and he's talking about the history of Bulgaria and people wanting to return to socialism, but also to a nationalism that appeals to an earlier time period when Bulgaria was fighting against the Ottoman Empire. And it is an interesting way to do that, with people literally trying to turn back the time, and sort of fake actors dressing up to do the political uprisings that happened at the time, to like putting on a show, pretending to be this old time. It's gone from this more focus on Alzheimer's to a much more like political thing. And as I said, I enjoy the writing. I think he's really well displaying the time. It really feels very tactile and real, and also at the same time strange in a way that I really like. That kind of strange surreality that feels almost like a dream. I think he's writing it really well. I would say, however, that our main character is kind of a stand-in for the writer. He is a writer himself, and he talks about novels that he's written that I assume are Gospodinov novels, but I don't know enough about the writer. I should probably have looked that up, but that's my assumption. And so he seems like he's a stand-in for the writer, and he's definitely got a very much like liberal centrist dad vibe, and there is a kind of a feeling of like old man yells at cloud, kind of that he's in his political analysis. It feels like it's not that deep in terms of what's actually going on and the reasons for people's unhappiness with their life. He doesn't really go into that, and it does feel very horseshoe theory, and I'm just going to use more buzzwords to describe this, but they're both as bad as each other, and it doesn't just explore the reasoning behind why people are feeling like that they're unhappy with the present day, the reasoning why they might be harkening back to an older time, and their actual demands. It is very like surface level, and so I feel like it's doing an interesting story and it is written well, but I'm not sold yet on the politics of the book or the point that it's trying to make. I feel like it's yeah, it just feels like any middle-aged bloke's discussion of politics. Hello. I apologise if you can hear the sound outdoors. I've been trying to film all morning, but it's a sunny day in spring, so my neighbours keep starting up with their hedge trimmer. They're quiet now, but they might start again. So, I have finished... There it is, hedge trimmer. I have finished Stillborn by Guadeloupe Nettle and Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov. And so we're going to talk about them. This one I talked about quite a lot in the middle, and it's interesting. It begins as being quite personal and a look at memory and the individual and a loss of memory, and then it becomes political and about a loss of memory and how that affects countries, and a look at sort of nationalism and looking back to a different time in our country's history and a desire to go back, and what the great time period of the past would be for each different country, a kind of idealism of the past, and how even different people within different countries idealise different parts of the past. And towards the end it goes back to being personal and individual again, and there's this kind of breaching of the fourth wall, if you can do that in a book. There is a merging of the writer and the character of the writer in the book, and kind of a look at his personal idea of memory and his personal experience as well of growing up in communist Bulgaria. So it's interesting. I enjoyed the writing. I think the writing is exactly my kind of whimsical weird, and so I really enjoyed that. But I did find, I don't know, I just found it a little empty. I don't know what I was expecting, but I felt like there was just some sort of connection missing. It seemed to always be on the side of being wry and being clever rather than being meaningful, as far as it to me anyway. I couldn't quite understand the point. I think I talked in the middle about how it was a bit centrist dad and very middle-aged bloke, and I definitely did feel that too, even with the more personal elements of it. It didn't catch me quite in the way that I thought it could do from the whimsy that was part of the style of the writing. So I enjoyed it, and it's not that I can't enjoy middle-aged bloke books. There are several books by middle-aged blokes I enjoyed. It's just a kind of sensibility. But yeah, overall I just feel like it's not going to stick with me very much, and it was fine and it was enjoyable and it was easy to read, but I don't love it. And then I am also 25 pages into Boulder by Eva Baltazar, and this is about a woman who is a cook on a ship, a cargo ship, in the Pacific Ocean next to South America. This was in Catalan and she lived in Barcelona, it's said, so she is a Spanish woman but she's working aboard this ship in Latin America, and she has... It's just basically describing her life on board the ship. Again, the writing, I'm really enjoying the writing in this one. I think it's really lovely so far. And she had a romantic relationship with a Scandinavian woman who worked for a company that had South American blood on their hands. That wasn't really explored much further than that, but it was just basically the romantic relationship, and there is kind of an alienation and an isolation. I'm only a quarter of the way into it, so there could be a lot more to come that I'm not really sure about. Just have to deal with it. I don't really have anything to put you on except the books I want to talk to you about, so I need to show you them. Please ignore the laundry in the background. So I have finished Boulder and I'm halfway through Stillborn, and it is interesting reading these two books together because they both deal with motherhood and are narrated by women who don't want to be mothers. So there is definitely a lot of thematic overlap between the two. I think I talked to you when I'd not read that much of Boulder, so the first quarter of it or so is really setting the scene of this woman who lives on a ship as a cook, and then she meets this woman who is Nordic in some way, and they move to Iceland. It's not really clear if she is Icelandic, but I guess it doesn't really matter. And they have a passionate love affair, and then after 10 years her lover decides she wants to have a baby, and Boulder, our titular character, doesn't want children, but she decides she'd rather let her partner go through having a child, artificial insemination, rather than lose her. And then they have a baby, and that's it. That's the whole thing. And she finds herself strangely drawn towards this child despite her lack of wanting a child, and it is their relationship and the way that having a child changes their relationship. But more than having a child, it's like the decisions made outside of your partner's interest, like regardless of your partner, So one partner decides to have a child regardless of how a partner feels about that, and the other partner decides to stay with her partner despite not wanting a child. It's sort of a question of identity. I found the writing at some points beautiful, although at some points I did roll my eyes. There's a lot of similes going on, and in the end they can get a little tedious. It felt a bit repetitive and a little overdrawn, and so I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. I wanted there's more beauty and less substance in this book a lot of the time, and for such a short book that feels unnecessary. The way that it looked at communication was interesting, but as I've said before, motherhood is a topic that I know interests a lot of people, but it doesn't really interest me, and that's nothing to do with my own personal feelings about motherhood, I don't think, but I'm just not that interested in reading from the perspective particularly of these characters who are not interested in motherhood and the concept of selfishness, or because Boulder is a very selfish character, but her desire not to be a mother is not part of that. I don't know, I guess I'm not really mulling over the politics as such, but rather my enjoyment of the book, and it was fine. It was fine, but I didn't fall in love with it. Now I have started Stillborn, and this is almost the opposite of Boulder in terms of the style of writing. There is no real beauty to it. It is very stripped back and very simplistic. It is about another woman who doesn't want to be a mother, who breaks up with her partner at the beginning of the book because she doesn't want to be a mother, and she's living in Mexico City, and her best friend, who when they were in their 20s they both talked about not wanting children, her best friend, now she's 36, has decided she does want a child, and so she and her partner try for a child, and there's talk about their fertility. Our main character also lives next door to a mother, a single mother, who has a son who has these incredible outbursts of rage. And so we're looking at these three different women and their relationships with motherhood and with one another, and the ways that women get burdened with the majority of the care in these situations, care of not just the children but also their mothers, and how those things are down to the woman. We have moved on now to talk about there is a severely disabled child, a child who wasn't thought was going to live for more than a few hours, and that's just, I've just got to the halfway point, and we're just moving on in that now. It is reminding me a little of No One Is Talking About This, in that we have a character who is writing and who is disconnected from the world and is feeling sort of at sea and uncertain and unable to settle down, and then someone close to them has a child with a disability. So it is that it follows a similar narrative path, but the writing style is nothing like that at all. Yeah, it's a very readable, which I know is a descriptor that a lot of people don't enjoy, but I mean, I'm fine. I'm halfway through, and it took me 4 train journeys, and my train journeys to work are not very long, and so it is a very quick, simple read because the writing is so simplistic, and it's very much more character focused. I would say we are really exploring the characters of these women and how they respond to the world around them. I would say I haven't fallen for it yet, but I am interested in seeing where it goes. I am in a terrible mood today though. I'm in a really bad mood. Someone stole my bike, which is not going to put anyone in a particularly good mood, is it? So I think that's the best you're going to get from me in terms of talking about these books, because I am, yeah, kind of just pissed off at the world right now. And then with Stillborn by Guadeloupe Nettle, again, yes, interesting in terms of the writing was very stripped back, very simple, but I enjoyed it, which doesn't always happen for me. Sometimes I find that writing that's that stripped back feels like it isn't trying enough, it isn't doing anything, like I felt about The Gospel According to the New World, but I felt like the writing in this worked very well for this kind of stark, spare story. But again, I'm not really sure the way that it was talked about disability and kind of this disabled child as an object. I didn't really enjoy that part of it. It was looking about like the burden of care and the burden of motherhood and connections. There was a bit about our main character Laura and her mother, which I felt like was kind of done a bit strangely. It didn't really feel integrated with the rest of the story. And then there was kind of a slight bit about feminism in Mexico, but again it felt a little shoehorned in. This sort of quieter, more personal story. We started off with a lot of Laura, but we ended up with a lot more of Alina, and it's told from like the first person Laura, but Alina's story is told in the third person, and it just felt like it didn't feel like it was sure in terms of the construction of the book, of what it really wanted to do and what it was really trying to say. It was fine again. The writing, like I said, was readable, and I found frustrating. I found its perspective to be frustrating and to be unthought through. Fine, but I didn't love it. So far I've read 5 of them, and I haven't loved any of them. I would say it would be, on the bottom would be The Gospel According to the New World, then we would have Standing Heavy, then Boulder, then Stillborn, and then Time Shelter would probably be the one that I have enjoyed the most out of all of them. It is the most me out of any of the books, except possibly Whale, and I have yet to start Whale. The announcement for it for the International Book Fair is coming on Tuesday. Today is Saturday, so I've got a few days to read more of these books and see how I feel about them. Hopefully I will enjoy the Whale, because I know a lot of people have enjoyed it, and it's supposed to be kind of more magical realist, Korean fiction, and it's like a modern classic in Korea, because I think it was published in 2003, and now 20 years later has been translated into English. So we will see. I will get started on that and let you know what I think. I haven't really been vlogging my life so much during this reading vlog. Let me know in the comments if you prefer reading vlogs where I just talk about the books, or if you want to see what's going on in my life. I've just been working, someone stole my bike, and tonight I'm going to a friend's birthday party. It's Monday. I've read a third of Whale by Myeong Kwan. I know I was intending to read all of it this weekend, but I did go to a party and then I was quite hungover. So I've done my best. Yeah, so this is a story set in the 20th century in Korea, over 3 different time periods following 3 different women, and it is told in a very fable-like fairy tale way. It is kind of magical realism. There's a reference to a lot of fairy tales, like the concept of fairy tales and the concept of storytelling comes up a lot. I don't know if it's referencing specific Korean like folk tales, because I don't know them very well, except that there's rabbits on the moon. I'm not super au fait with Korean fairy tales or with Korean 20th century history. Like obviously Korean War, division at the 38th parallel, everybody knows about that, and then the dictatorship in both North and South Korea up until the 1980s, and then rapid industrialization and modernization, and now K-pop. That's the extent of my knowledge of Korean history. So it is interesting to read this. It is reminding me a little bit of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I guess is always going to happen when you're talking about magical realism, but it has that very much, this is a story, very storytelling forward narrative style, and also it has giant dicks swinging around everywhere and a lot of tits as well. It's body focused. There's a lot of bodies in this book, and yeah, it's fine. It's very readable. I'm not. This is the one that I've seen the most hype around and the most praise from everyone that I've seen review it. All the others that I've seen reviewed have had like a mixed reception, but this one has huge adoration, and I haven't quite felt that yet for it. I'm not like that's not going to happen. I haven't got to the point where I feel like, no, this is not for me, but I'm definitely having to sort of immerse myself in this style of storytelling, because it is different from a lot of the other books, but yeah, it's very, like I said, very focused on the idea that it is a story. There was a moment when he said, "For years after she vanished from the harbour city, Gyeongbok gave birth to Cheon. Nothing is known about her whereabouts during those 4 years. We can only assume she must have wandered the country without staying too long in one place." And then it's just pages of what she did in those years while she was where nothing was known about her. Meta, I guess, that it's like, no, nothing's known about it, as if he's not going to tell us, and then he just goes on to tell us everything that happened. And then there's another bit that was said, "Miraculously, Gyeongbok survived those war-torn years. But let us move on from stories about the war and save all that for another day. Reader, I ask for your understanding. It goes beyond the scope of this book and requires more pages and more time, along with the courage and tears to move through the pain." And so it's interesting to consider a country where a specific moment in the not too distant past has such a, like, it hangs over everything, I suppose, it's such a significant thing, like the rending of this country into 2 different parts and the violence of the war, in the same way that when you read Argentinian fiction, the dictatorship is always ever present, and in Northern Irish fiction, the Troubles is always present. It's being fantastical and weird and fable-like and like kind of farcical and body-focused, but there is something darker and something more about the Korean psyche in relation to its history that I think we're talking about in this book. But I'm only a third of the way in, so I will keep going and get back to you in a minute. Hello. So I finished The Whale and I don't get it. I don't get the hype. I thought it was just okay. So as I was telling you before, it's about these three women and we go through their lives kind of chronologically, although we do go off in tangents and flash back and forth. I just found it quite repetitive and that was kind of boring, because I get that it's about like the cyclical nature of time and the repetitions of sins of the father kind of feeling, a repetition of we are doomed to repeat our pasts kind of a feeling, because this is very much a fable like folktale like story, and so that is understandable, but it didn't do it in a way that I found enjoyable to read. It just got a little tiresome, and also I don't mind the literal repetitions of phrases, stock phrases and things. Those are fine because they do give a sense of that kind of folkloric feeling, but the repetition of actual plot I found quite dull. It just never really captured me or interested me that much. I didn't really care about any of the characters, and also like I know we can't really judge the morality of the book because it's a folktale kind of thing and things are different in folktales. You can't really, one of the times the narrator tells us was peaceful, joyful for this woman who'd experienced terrible things was the time that she was being raped continuously. Like, it was a bit confusing. I guess that's kind of similar to Garcia Marquez in some ways. I just never really fell for it. I never really understood why it's so hyped. It was fine, but it wasn't that interesting, really, was my final feeling. So out of all of them, my favourite was Time Shelter. I think the writing of that was the most interesting. The ideas it was exploring were the most interesting. It was the one that actually kept me compelled throughout. And that was the one that won. So I intended to get this video up before the announcement and tell you that Time Shelter was the one I wanted to win, but I am currently adjusting the dosage of my meds and I am exhausted all the time because that is one of the side effects. So I've just had to give myself a little more leeway and this has taken a little longer than I intended. But I would put this, so if I was going to rank them all again now here at the ending, I would put at the bottom would still be The Gospel According to the New World, then we would have Stunning Heavy, then Whale and Boulder, kind of similar for me in terms of interest in them. Yeah, Stillborn, and then Time Shelter at the top there. I'm sorry, I'm really tired. I'm not giving much energy, but I have hope you've enjoyed the rest of the video before we change my medication and I felt like this. And I will see you again very soon. Please remember to like this video if you liked it, to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, because I would love to have you here with us, and there will be another prize vlog along soon-ish for the women's prize. So if that's what you're interested in, do stick around and we'll see you again very soon. I put out new videos twice a week. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.